Spring practice has arrived. Ohio State football invited us and the rest of the reporting crew into Wood Hayes Athletic Center on Tuesday for the first 30 minutes of practice in the morning, very early in the morning, but that's how we like it. Get to see the very first minutes of spring practice every year. Nathan Baird from cleveland.com, along with Stephen Means and Andrew Gillis. Let's talk about offense first, because that was actually the side of the ball where maybe there's a little bit more intrigue, especially on the offensive line. Stephen, we've been speculating especially on the right side of the offensive line. Who was going to shuffle around? Who might be in the mix at guard? What'd you see today?
Yeah, I was coming in here expecting to just see Josh Fryer in there because the last time we talked to Ryan Day, he talked about Josh Fryer potentially repping there. But Josh Fryer is still at right tackle. Luke Montgomery in there. And I asked Ryan Day about what they like about him in there. He gets after guys in the run game. Some of the stuff they want to do with the scheme, it makes sense there. And I think it does actually make sense. Even back in high school, you maybe thought that, okay, they're going to start him out at tackle, but his future might be at guard. And when you're thinking about what the run game could look like with Ryan Day and Chip Kelly calling it, what he's bringing along, what Justin Fry has his background, it might make more sense for a team who might run the ball a little bit more to have a guy like that who can get after that on the right side. While at center, we think it's Seth McLaughlin's job, but on day one, it was a back and forth between Carson Hinsman and Seth McLaughlin. It did seem like there were at some spots where you could either choose the transfer or the returning guy to be first in line. They went with the guy who's been here as first in line, and so it'll be interesting to see how that continues to evolve. But on day one, starting offensive line was Joshua Simmons, Donovan Jackson, Carson Hinsman / Seth McLaughlin, depending on the period it was, Luke Montgomery at right guard with Enoch working in every so often, and Josh Fryer still at right tackle. I think that's the most interesting thing right now because that wide receiver is just kind of up in the air, and tight end, it's so new that let's see a couple more practices. But that offensive line, we have at least a concrete foundation of where we can start this conversation going forward.
Yeah, Andrew, as we always say, like the things that we see on the first day of spring practice, especially the first minutes of the first day, don't mean everything, but they often mean something. And this team has been working out and practicing and doing all those, not practicing, but working out, doing other drills, doing the mat drills all winter to get ready for today. It wasn't like they all just showed up today. And the fact that Luke Montgomery has put himself in a first-string position on the first day of spring practice tells me something. And I think it is also an intriguing fit potentially because of kind of things that Stephen was saying. You know, Ryan Day said that his athleticism, they think he can get off the ball, get onto guys quickly. And I think as an asset in the run game and what Chip Kelly has done traditionally, that seems to be a kind of an obvious fit.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the things that, you have to, kind of look at, and Ryan Day mentioned this too, like in the beginning part of spring practice, it's much more about development than it is putting guys in schemes and putting guys in kind of positions where they're actually going to play. I mean, we're doing this in the first week of March, and they don't play a game until the last week of August. So a lot can change, but I do think you're right. I do think that there is something to have him at right guard. I was also really impressed by Tegra Shabola today, just physically, because, you don't get to see them hit. You don't get to see them do a lot, which when you're talking about offensive linemen, that's a big deal if you haven't heard. Tegra Shabola kind of looks the part of a right tackle, and you started to think a little bit like, man, if Shabola plays right tackle and Montgomery plays right guard and McLaughlin's your center, and you go down the line, you're like, you might have something here. You might have something that can build off of last year where, there were a lot of people that were really upset with how the offensive line played, and I think you might see some notable improvements. So that right side of the offensive line is really fascinating, and you're right, it starts with Montgomery, and in this Chip Kelly scheme, it's going to be interesting to see how they're used.
Tegra Shabola has looked the part basically since he got here to some extent. I think now the next step for him is to look the part in terms of fundamentals and performance and all of those things, and that's not me like ragging on him. It's just the next step he has to take in his development, and I think that's something to watch over the course of the spring. Do guys like him start to push the older guys in a real way, to push the guy ahead of him on the depth chart? Does Ohio State get to preseason camp and say, okay, well, actually we have, instead of where we were last year, where it was like we've got like 3.5 starters and like what else are we doing here, and it was a rough start to the year for the offensive line. Does this spring go smoother, and do they get the preseason camp with like 7 guys who are like, no, these guys who legitimately start now, it's just a matter of who do we give the bad news to start the year that they're going to have to come off the bench. That would be a huge step forward for this offensive line, which doesn't have to be one of the best offensive lines in the country necessarily, considering all the other talent that's here, but it can't be a thing that's undercutting that talent as it was at times last year. A lot more talk about this on Buckeye Talk. Get it wherever you can find podcasts, and get the text 614-350-3315. News, updates, analysis as soon as we see it here on the field at spring practice from Buckeye Talk.